Hey Philippe,
Hey Patrick, how's it
well,
going?
welcome to the Talking Talent podcast, my friend.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you on. Finally, it's been a few months since we last caught up down in Abu Dhabi.
Indeed, indeed. And let me be the first one to say I've listened to the other episodes and congratulations. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's quite a simple format. I'm actually quite lucky in that I'm surrounded by so many people who are highly talented and forward thinking, yet so down to earth. And because these people are so down to earth and so focused on achieving for themselves and others, a lot of them don't have their voices heard actually. So this is why I want to have people like you and the others on to sort of share their story, provide insights, and provide inspiration just to so many people around the world who have been tuning in. So honored to have you on board, and you really belong here.
Well, I appreciate the confidence.
Aha, come on. I know you well enough. There's no confidence needed to get you on.
Well,
So,
I'm happy to be contributing.
so the reason why you were one of the first people on the list when it came to me looking at the top 10 people to who to have on is that you sort of have the best career I've ever seen. And I'm not talking about jobs, I'm talking about a guy with a career. And the reason why I say that is that you get to travel the world, really delve as deep as possible into the societies that you end up in, and shake hands, meet, learn from the world's top leaders and business people and politicians and whatever else. And you get to provide problem solving solutions based around what their needs is and what they're trying to do and trying to sell. And at the same time, you do all this for some of the most prestigious publications in the world, Forbes magazine, uh, Japan Times, and a whole wath of others. So let us into the secret.
Well, I have to agree with you. I do feel very blessed to have the opportunity to do what I do. As you know, started out my professional career really wanting to see the world, and so my first stop was the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Um, I went into the diplomatic corps hoping to be able to see the world. With my luck, I was sent to two tours in the same country for my first 8 years. I ended up deciding to jump out of public service and get into the private sector. And there I got lucky enough to join the company that I'm working with now, Global Media. And essentially, as you said, now I have the opportunity to spend 10 months of the year on the road.
Yeah,
And I essentially change countries every 2 to 3 months. So
yeah,
unlike your usual business trip wherein you arrive on a Sunday, work Monday to Friday, and leave on Saturday, I actually get the chance to immerse myself into the culture and build my network while I'm there. End up to a point where I have my favorite little restaurant or favorite little cafe, or starting to make some friends in the area. And I always say it's sort of like auditioning for where I'm going to settle down one day. And
yeah.
so it's now 42 countries, and 42 countries of spending at least 3 months there.
Yeah, and I want to put that in perspective. I think it's quite difficult to. You have to be motivated to travel to about 30 countries. You have to be a bit crazy to get to 50. And anything above that is you probably have got problems. And the difference between how you travel and how I travel is I believe you're probably the best traveler of all the people I've ever met because, as you said, you really immerse yourself in the culture for 2 to 3 months at a time. And when you're there, you get to hang out with the coolest people. And at the same time, you get to build a network which is second to none.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the perks of the job. One of the things I enjoy is this is traveling with a purpose. When I essentially, I figuratively get parachuted into a country where I don't know anybody. and am challenged to be able to produce something tangible, which in this case is our country profiles or CEO profiles that we write for Forbes magazine, for instance, without having any initial contacts. So we're forced to really think outside the box and really have an open attitude towards networking and meeting different folks in specific sectors, and really learn to be strategic and how to make friends, right? And if anything I've learned is the importance of being able to connect with people on a human level to get things done beyond the professional objectives that I have. And so, yeah, again, I really cannot complain with the experience that this has given me, and essentially it's also showed that there is tremendous power in being able to just connect with multiple people on a human level, and that translates then eventually to business opportunities, obviously.
Yeah, and just to give sort of people listening in the sort of life that this guy lives, I met him. I met him in Stockholm a few years ago. I still don't know how he got my contact details. I met him in Dublin. I met him in Manila last year, and then I met him in Saudi Arabia last year, and then I met him in, as I said, Abu Dhabi last year. And this guy is a rock star. And I mean, he is, as he says, he can go into any environments and not only survive but thrive and win and help as many people around him to win as possible. And talking about winning, since we've had this sort of 2 months global sort of lockdown, what you have done, instead of sort of sitting on your thumbs and taking it easy like everyone else, you have actually reached out to the people who can provide PPE for those on the front line, and you have made a connection between those who can supply the most quality product available, and you've reached out to markets around the world, like the NHS in the UK, Amazon through Europe, and you have been able to help use your network to provide those who need access, the governments and private organizations who need access to PPE for those on the front line during this pandemic, to make that connection and bridge it. And honestly, Philippe, it's just you down to a T. You're such a kind, caring, considerate guy. You're always looking at the angles and how you can help and contribute to the wider picture. And that's the thing I think that always shines through every time you meet someone.
Well, you're absolutely right that that this has been a strong commitment of mine. Just to take a couple of steps back, having traveled incessantly over the past 9 years, producing these publications, you can quickly realize that the real value in what we were doing beyond the publications was really the connections that we were making. I was essentially paid to sit down with 10 CEOs or heads of state or politicians from different countries, really just to pick their brains and spend time with them and talk to them, learning how they view different problems around the world, and how we can share that information for people to solve their own problems. That's essentially what we were doing and helping connect people. So as early as January, before the pandemic hit, we were already in place and preparing to launch a new company called Global Media Connects, which I'm essentially leading now. The objective of which was try to leverage the relationships we have, and instead of writing about it, literally connecting people and helping facilitate transactions between the folks that we know. Unfortunately, when the pandemic happened, the publication business was obviously completely shut down because it is travel based, and therefore everyone was grounded. And I wanted to prove the concept of the power of these networks and see how we could help. So we started out reaching to the different mayors, governors, and different government officials that we had met across different countries, and it quickly was obvious that they desperately needed PPEs coming from vetted sources, because unfortunately there are a lot of bad actors out there, and a lot of folks have fallen prey for scams, and for, you know, they've paid and never received their items, and these are things that are desperately needed. They also came across with speculation, people taking advantage of the crisis for overcharging, and so I figured it was time to test out our network and see how we could help, and break that cycle of speculation and get a lot of this equipment out of warehouses and into the hands of those who need it. And so far, knock on wood, we've been able to help folks, as you mentioned, in Europe and in the United States. And hopefully in our own little way, we're able to continue helping as many people as we can during this pandemic.
Yeah. Can you give us some of the names that you've helped across the US as well, or is that private information?
Well, you know, you mentioned a couple already. You know, we have been working with Amazon Europe primarily as one of the larger folks that we've been working with. Conversations with NHS, and obviously, like I said, different state governors in the US, where it's badly needed. And then on the flip side, we've also managed to leverage our contacts in China, and really identify those trusted and reliable suppliers that can provide these PPEs that are at par with the international standards required. And so again, what we've been able to do is connect both sides without really giving them the space and to be able to directly transact and allow them to have smooth transactions. And so far, we've been relatively successable. It hasn't always been easy, and we look forward to building on that and helping more people. This is a problem that's not going away immediately. The shortage of supplies is real, and so I'm looking forward to be able to help other countries in Europe, whether that be in France, in Germany, and Sweden, for instance, as well, where we'd be very keen to lend our services.
I'm recording this podcast through Anchor, and if you're considering doing a podcast and you haven't heard about Anchor, then let me tell you, it's the easiest way to do a podcast. So let me explain. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute the podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many other platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And it's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. Definitely check it out. Download the app now from the store. Yeah, of course. But this is not just something that you have done recently. I remember when I met you in Saudi Arabia, you were meeting the head of the World Scouts Federation, which is actually the biggest charity in the world, both in terms of finances, in terms of numbers, and you were very you were very welcome to using your skill set, your network, and your publications to sort of help the Boy Scouts of the world, you know, and the large organization that is, to do as best they could as well. So you've got that caring side in you. You're very business minded, but at the same time you've got a very human aspect, and you can actually see the difference that it makes, you know, and the big projects that you're involved in do make a difference to organizations, and you know, it's at smaller levels but also right up to national levels. So I commend you so much.
Well, thank you. I mean, I was raised from very humble beginnings, but in that process was taught firmly about the importance of integrity and caring for others, and putting the greater good ahead of mine. Is that always great business? Some may argue no. But at the end of the day, I am a strong believer that if you conduct yourself in a proper way and do right by everyone that that you encounter, and make sure that every deal or every transaction you are a part of finds a way to create a win-win situation or a winning situation for all parties involved. Um, the financial side or the material side will always follow and take care of itself. At the root is there purpose to what we're doing? Are we able to help people? And is everyone involved getting what they need out of it? And if those boxes are checked, then generally the rest takes care of itself. And I'm a firm believer of that.
Yeah, I'm the same. I always have a rule that whenever I sit down at a table for whatever regard, I always ask myself, what's in it for the other person? You know, because if I can meet their needs or make their life easier or make things happen, you know, in a more quicker, faster way for them, then they will come back to me, and then they
Sure.
will want to do business with me again, or you know, interact with me again, because people are very time short and they're very resource short generally, and if
Mm.
I can help them to get closer to where they need to go, just by having that approach of giving first and receiving second,
Mm.
then I find that it tends to really work out really well in the longer term.
Sure. Well, one of the mantras I've lived by, I picked it up in just a random book that I was reading by an author named Zig Ziglar.
Yes.
And in that book, I'll paraphrase. He essentially says, and he talks about the sales profession, and he says that you can get anything you want in life for as long as you help enough people get what they want.
Yes, that's true.
And that's been a guiding principle for me, and that really stuck to me. And it's one of the reasons, folks, you encounter people every day, and there are a few there are a few that really stand out, and um, this explains my interactions with you as well. You meet someone like yourself, for example, who has such a positive aura, and has such an open spirit, that you can feel immediately the sincerity, and then business flows from there. It really begins from a sincere human to human connection, and then the rest of the opportunities will usually flow.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And can I ask you, because you're the person who shakes hands with the most important people in our society, that sort of pull the strings in a lot of ways. And is there any sort of attributes that you see that runs through those individuals? I mean, don't all have them, but is there any sort of at least vague sort of characteristic those people have in common?
That's an interesting question. I find that the more successful the person I meet, the more humble they usually are, and that's something that's really interesting. Although there is still a paradox, because you can be humble and still have a strong ego. Um, and I've been seeing, I see a lot of CEOs that have really made it, are the ones that really have this humility about them, while still remaining sort of stern and confident in their abilities. And those are qualities that I, for one, aspire to. The other thing that's most common that I really admire from folks that I meet is an ability of cultivating human connection. People who you could have CEOs or heads of state even that will treat the janitor the same way that he's going to treat his peer, the CEO in front of them, and that ability to connect with the majority of the big amount of people, it tends to lead to success in my experience, and that's something that I always just strive for.
Yeah, that's something that I think it's common sense. If the way I look at an organization is, I think that every person within the organization works in sales. If you're every person is the different part of the sales process. So if you look at the janitor or the cleaner, they're actually the most important, because first impressions matter. And if you go into, say, a new office or a big office or whatever type of establishment, and it's messy and grubby, it gives a really bad first impression about what goes on the upper floors. So
Yeah.
I always think the cleaners are the first and most important people within the organization, because they create the initial impression that you get of an organization. And then I think the next most important person is the receptionist, or the person who answers the phone or talks to you face to face to guide you to the meeting. Because again, now you've had the first was a visual interaction, now you've had a verbal interaction, and if both of those are negative, then it's very hard to come back from that actually as an organization. So it's why that even if I'm working in a team or not, I will always treat everyone with the utmost respect, because everyone is part of the sales process and everyone deserves their respect for being as part of that. And just to follow on from what you were saying too, I've got a rule that I live my life by, and I always tell people, if anyone says to me that I'm nice, I always say I'm absolutely not nice. I'm not a nice person, but what I am is that I'm kind. I think kindness is a lot more powerful, and it's more contributing to society than being nice. And in fact, I think being nice is exhausting. To go around being nice to people would drive me mad, but I can certainly be kind. And I have a rule that the moment that people mistake my kindness for weakness, I cut them off. I think it's one of the biggest attributes, that if you don't get it right, if you think that someone's being kind to you and you see it as a weakness, then you don't belong in my circle, and you will actually never be given another chance again. I'm that strict on it, and I really hold it tight. And it's interesting that you say that about the CEOs. They are really humble, but they have got that sternness to them as well, because the kindest people are the strongest people. And I would never mess around. I would never mess around with someone who's shown me kindness.
Sure. I think what goes hand in hand with that, kindness does get you a long way. And I think what goes hand in hand with that is just general respect for other people. Respect the moment that you maintain a certain level of respect to people, whether you know them or not, but appreciating that everyone has something positive to contribute to any situation. That recognition and that respect, sort of leads to the ability to connect with people. It puts more people at ease. It allows for better communication, and in the workplace tends to lead to smoother troubleshooting or problem solving.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, everyone is valuable. Like every single human being that you meet is valuable and do have something really important to bring to the table with their voice or with their opinion or their skill set, and they should be treated as such. At the same time, everyone is carrying their own troubles as well. So if every person we meet, if you knew half of their story, you would feel sympathy for them, and you would want them to do better. So, like, without having to learn their story, just assume that people are having troubles in their life, whether it's at their work or at their marriage or at their their weight or whatever, their education. Just see that everyone has trouble and treat them as such, and respect them and encourage them along their path. And it's a lot better for everyone if we act like that.
It's interesting. We're on a podcast about talent, and the ability to connect with people, the ability to maintain and cultivate relationships on its own is such an underrated skill. Whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, the ability to be able to express sincerity to another human being is a very important skill that leads to the ability to make deals happen and get things moving in the workplace. I've come to a point where I've realized, that one of the strengths that I never knew I had, and part of this is actually through conversations with you through the years, is understanding the value of the skill that I've been able to hone to maintain these relationships, whether a testament to that is us meeting in different parts of the world in different times, right?
Yeah.
It's just it's a testament to the effort put into sending a little note, or replying to a note that's sent, or just having consistent touch points with folks that come your way, which then leads to a global network, a global web, that can be applied to do some very good things.
Yeah, good point. Do you know that email or that note or message that you receive, which is quite long and very important, and you don't want to give it a one-liner, so you put it away for later because it's so important that you want to respond correctly. You know what I'm talking about?
Sure, definitely.
And then actually, all the other things stack up, and you respond to all of them quickly, and all of a sudden, 2 weeks have gone past, and you haven't responded to the most important message that you need to respond to. We need to have a name for that, because that is such a big deal. And I believe a lot of the people who don't respond, actually, they want to do better and they want to respond better, but they just don't. They want to do it in such a good way that it actually gets pushed so far down their to-do list that it actually never happens, and then they make themselves look like they didn't care.
Sure, yeah, that happens. That happens to the best of us. I mean, it's also a product of the evolving technology and the way we all manage time, right? I can remember a time where an email coming in was a big event.
Yeah.
You took your time. You took your time writing it and properly wording it and having the proper format and everything, like an old school letter. Whereas today, with the majority of folks getting their emails on their phones, a lot of times I'm noticing if you have to scroll 3 or 4 times, then you're setting that aside. Sometimes answering with just a sentence or two.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's also a product of habits in the workplace. And unfortunately, some of those opportunities to write a lengthy answer are reduced, which boils down to, again, that skill to manage your time and to give importance to these gestures. Gestures go such a long way in being able to connect with folks. I'll tell you a story.
Please.
I met a CEO in the United States, who a really large real estate development company in the U.S. And he had gone to Japan on a trip about 15 years ago, and was introduced by a fellow American who lived in Japan, and introduced him to this Japanese lad. They had a few drinks. They shared a few meals, and since then and after that, just would keep in touch, send postcards. At the time, there's no email and internet yet when that story began. But they would send small notes, Christmas greetings, birthday greetings, and the like. And every time one would be in the U.S. or one would be in Japan, they would catch up for a meal. That relationship went on for a good 10 years, until one day the Japanese counterpart calls the CEO and says, "Hey, you said you were in real estate, right? Well, we're looking for a real estate developer for a Japanese company that's putting together a project in the United States." And right then and there, they agreed on $150 million project.
Wow.
Right, and so proof that they had never really talked about working together. They never really discussed what they could get out of each other. They just maintained the relationship, and that obviously paid dividends on both ends. And I think that there lies, I think, the delicate balance and that skill of maintaining relationships in the most sincere manner. The challenge, the difficulty sometimes is folks equating networking with keeping a lead warm until I need him.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's not the way.
And that's really, yeah. Go ahead.
Can I actually go into another kernel of why that story or that result came to fruition? I believe when you meet people, person to person, there's a lot of trust that can be gained or established just from being around people physically, because only 7% of communication is verbal. 93% is non-verbal, and it's in cues, tonality, body language, and things like that, which we subconsciously pick up from people that we're around. And this is one of the sort of worries I have now with this increased digitization of the planet. People are going to meet each other less and less within a face-to-face meeting, at events and conferences, and these other things. And I'm not a big fan of traveling for work, actually, but I'm a big fan of going over and meeting the person at least once at the start of the relationship, just to get that sense from them, and show them I'm trustworthy, and to gain how trustworthy they are as if we're going to go into this relationship, over the next years. And me and you're a perfect example of that. Me and you met in Stockholm, and we actually invited you for dinner, and it went on from there. And I've met you in multiple countries and continents ever since that. And it all came from that initial meeting. If that was a phone call, we might never have picked up that again, or it might have been just two people who followed on social media or whatever. But I do wonder, and I would like to hear with the increased digitization that we're going to have, more remote working and things like that. You're a guy who's very much about putting your feet on the ground, shaking hands and getting in there. How do you see this world progressing over the next 3 months to 3 years as a result of the sort of the pandemic we're going through at the moment and the changes that are going to derive from that?
I couldn't agree with you more. My whole business model, while challenging of having to travel so much, is really nested on the fact that meeting people face to face bring tremendous value towards getting deals done. In our business model, I meet a CEO for about 45 minutes to an hour, and that initial time spent with him is really valuable in really connecting and building the trust that is required to be able to transact and be able to do business together. I'm a strong believer on the value of meeting face to face. Having said that, there is a looming danger, because everyone is talking about now how the new normal. Right. I mean, just yesterday, I believe it was yesterday, Twitter has just announced that their people will be working from home permanently. They'll be opening their offices, and that'll be the choice of the company of when they open the offices. But then when the people can go back to the office, well, that's going to be the decision of their people, because they're essentially saying that they've proven that the business can run without people being present in the workplace. I have my reservations about that. Even within my own company, discussions have been going on about how to revolutionize or how to evolve the business model, considering the possibility that we may not be able to travel for a considerable amount of time. So how to use chat platforms or video conferencing platforms, digital signature for contracts, and all these things. Are obviously all tools that are very useful, but I feel that there's still a missing element. Call me old-fashioned, but there's still a missing element of real human interaction and real human contact. I believe business can be done that way, but I think there's a limitation to what you're able to do, and I feel that it puts a ceiling on the possible depth of a relationship that you can have.
Yeah, it really does. And when I look at productivity that will derive from this, you know that there's a thing called Price's Law, and Price's Law dictates that 50% of productivity is done by the square root of the number of people in the organization. So if it's an organization of 25 people, then 5 people are responsible for 50% of the work. Now, it gets interesting when you go to bigger organizations, because if it's an organization of 10,000 people, then 100 people are responsible for 50% of the work. So what this makes me ponder is some people are very employable because they're very diligent, conscientious, and driven to get the job done and do the best they can for something which they see as bigger than themselves. Then it brings you to a situation where there's the others who just want a job or need to be employed, or they see it as a foothold to something else or whatever that is. And from an organization level, does that mean that we just have less? We have the people who are driven are carrying more people. Does Price's Law become even more sort of? Is it the fact that instead of being 5 out of 25, that it's actually 3 out of 25? And it's 30 out of 10,000 because those are the most driven people, and the others are actually just filling in the sort of spots. Or how do you foresee this working out? Because not everyone is driven, focused, and motivated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. Which brings me back to sort of what motivates me at the beginning when we spoke about my experience of the importance for me of having a purpose. Working or traveling in this case with a purpose. It is a giant question mark on how this limited, this more digital world with limited human interaction, how that plays into motivating folks. Because when you talk about the 5 people in an organization of 25 that do 50% of the work, what's not indicated there is how those 5 people are actually helping to drive and motivate those around them.
Yeah.
Right. In an office setting, when employee A has something to do and he relies on the teamwork and contributions of employee B, if employee A is motivated enough, then they can draw the best out of employee B, even if they're not as motivated. And so it is a concern for me in the direction of the quote unquote new normal that folks want to paint, because I do feel that there's something to be said about being a team and working around each other, and how the motivation of one can be infectious or contagious to others. Right? We're talking, yes, for the lack of a better word in this time.
Yeah, of course.
It is something that you can see someone with such a positive aura, that positive aura could inspire someone else to be motivated, right? And that's lost on a Zoom call.
Especially when we go 5 years down the line and these employee A and employee B have never met, even though they've been working in the same team for 2 years.
Correct.
When you look at the Twitter example. Mm-hmm. And there's also the point around that. What does this new world look like? Whenever we go forward to a situation where people are just more static, they're more boxed in, because for a lot of people, getting out of the office and even just doing the daily commute is actually some sort of unwinding. For some people, it winds them up and stresses them, but for others, it's part of their daily routine, which sort of takes them away and gives them a sense to have a sense of self-pride. They get up, they put on better clothes, they're more presentable, they've more self-pride. What happens when they never have to show themselves in public? Mm-hmm. Because they get their deliveries and stuff delivered to them, and their food, mm-hmm, and takeaways and all this.
Right. I mean, I gave this some thought actually a couple of weeks ago, and I tried to think back as to when was the last time that there was a really globally life-altering event. And I realized that we could equate this to post 9/11.
Yeah.
The day after 9/11, on September 12th, the world was no longer the same, and people had to adapt how they did certain things, like air travel, for example. The TSA, the security, and all the protocols that were put in place was something that now we all consider normal and are able to adapt around and live around. And it leads one to believe that a pandemic or the situation that we're in right now would lead to some sort of life-altering life-altering change that we're going to learn to adapt to. And at the same time, I'm also an eternal optimist, right? Where the human spirit will find a way to adapt, because at the end of the day, human interaction is something that we all biologically crave.
Absolutely.
Right.
And the thing, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I'm saying that I'm really confident that as a species we will find the way, and there's going to be a course correction, but ultimately a balance should be struck.
The only constant is change. The one thing that we're guaranteed is turbulence. It comes in different sizes of waves, and this is a large wave. And like yourself, I see this as the best opportunity in 100 years, because turbulence brings opportunity. And those who react the fastest to the new norm, as they're calling it, will be the people who will benefit from it on the other end. And of course, you're Philippe Le Saux. If anyone's going to move fast and hard and serve as many people as possible, then you will come out of this so much more better than you went into this. And that's why I wanted you on this podcast, because you've got that ability to work hard, put in a shift, but do it in a way that it enhances the life of so many other people around you. And when other people are freaking out, you're like a laser sharp mind. You're seeing the problems and you're finding solutions to help overcome them.
Well, necessity is the driver of innovation, right? And I feel like one of the reasons that I felt comfortable about coming on the podcast and speaking with you as well is to hopefully communicate that mindset to people, that even in the darkest of hours, you can set your energy and focus your energy towards helping those around you, and that will create opportunities to better everyone's situation. So that energy should be focused on something positive and productive, and that should yield results for the greater good.
Amen.
Amen to that.
Perfect way to end.
Philippe. Thank you very much, Patrick, for having me again. I would like to send out a shameless plug to your listeners. For those, we are still very much active in trying to help people.
Please
connect for PPEs. We have set up a website, www.gmipost.com/GMIconnects. And that is a website where we'd have some information where you could reach us in our team, so that we could perhaps help. If you have PPEs that you'd like to get out there, or if you are in need of PPEs, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll try to help you as best as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will put any links that you send for people into the comment section here, so that people can connect directly to the service that you're offering to help get the PPE, whether that's a company level or governmental level or anything in between. And I really appreciate you coming on, and it's always an honor to talk with you, Philippe.
Thank you, Patrick. And again, I want to commend you for your continuous work and your tireless work in making people's lives better. And the energy, the positive energy that you radiate, and I don't know how to communicate this to the listeners, but the positive aura that Patrick gives off is unmatched with anyone else I've met in the world, and I've been around.
Wow, so, that's a compliment.
Yeah, well, yeah, keep it up, brother. Sweden is lucky to have you. Ireland is lucky to have you. The world is lucky to have you.
Yeah, we'll see where I end up next. Sweden has been so kind to me, and I really love this place. So just trying to make the most of this opportunity and give as much back to the city of Stockholm as possible.
Well, I wish you the best of luck, my friend.
Thanks, brother. Have a lovely evening over there, and I'm sure I'll talk to you soon.
Excellent.
Merci beaucoup. Take care, brother.